groups, and this we will explain very slowly over the next little while we get everyone into the focus groups and people everyone finishes logging into Zoom here. So just to remind you, this this conference was funded by the USDA, and the folks involved in the proposal are shown on this slide here. So Abdel was the PI on this, and then we had myself and Dawn from Colorado State University, and then many other folks from across universities in the U.S. And it's been great having all these people involved as we all try to figure out how to do things online. If you can advance the slide. So I would like to acknowledge Abdel for his hard work on this conference. You know, this conference basically was organized twice. For example, he figured out how to get people a gluten-free boxed lunch for today's breakout groups before we then figured out how to do it with Zoom breakout rooms. So thanks, Abdel. And I also like to acknowledge Monique and Brian for helping behind the scenes with pulling the technical aspects off. And sort of in keeping with the spirit of the drawn out nature of this conference, we'll be sending Abdel gifts in the mail every once in a while as an appreciation. So you can look for those. Okay, next slide, please. So the purpose of the focus groups today basically are the same as the objectives in the proposal for the conference that we submitted. We want to identify gaps in the knowledge in hemp cultivation, testing, processing, and markets. And a lot of that, hopefully, we have addressed through the content of the conference so far. And then today's activity largely gets to prioritizing research. And this is research that is USDA fundable research. So the idea, you know, is what they would normally fund in any other crop. And then in addition, the third goal of the proposal and conference and the focus groups is to form partnerships. So we'll be breaking out into small groups of 5 to 10 people on a given subject area, and we'll go through the exercise. Josie Plout is coordinating the breakout groups or the focus groups, and will now explain the process that we'll be using to work in these groups to prioritize research and outreach needs.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. My name is Josie Plout. I am with the Institute for the Built Environment at CSU, and we do a lot of work in the human dimensions around place, and certainly agriculture is a place-based activity, so I'm excited to be here with you all. I'm going to sort of walk us through the logistics of the breakout groups and hopefully get us all prepared to be there. So first of all, for Zoom, it looks like everybody's got this one. Turn off your videos for the main session. Although video is encouraged during the breakout groups, it's really going to help you communicate well with each other and create connectivity. So if you can, please turn on your video during the breakouts. Also, if everyone can assure that your name is displayed as you would like to see it, you can right click your name and it'll give you the option to rename. So go ahead and assure that you've got first and last name showing up, and that'll help your focus group participants know who you are, and it also helps us get you into the right groups. If you are calling on a telephone and a computer, you can link the two together, and that's usually by connecting to your, if you go into the participant list, you can see your participant ID, and then on your phone, you can hit star and your participant ID and star again. So if you need to do that. And if you have any questions, you can use the chat function to do that. So if it's clarification about which breakout group you'd like to be in, or if you need technical help, if you're having issues there, you can ask the host any technical questions that you have. And then at the end of the session today, we will have the chat open for everybody to have their comments sort of related to the overall focus groups work that you do today. So focus group logistics, you've been assigned by interest area. There were just 2 areas that we ended up combining, but again, we broke up into sometimes multiple groups around breeding and genetics, disease management, economics and marketing, education, outreach, and equity have been brought together as one group, farming practices, harvest and post-harvest, insect management, phytoremediation, and regulatory issues. So you were kind of randomly assigned within the area of interest that you were in if there were multiple groups. And so that's how that's working. The next piece of this is we've developed an online Google form to capture the outputs of your conversation today. So I'm going to put that into the chat. Let me get that going to everyone. And it's going to be good if several of you can capture this, this link. And not everyone will need it, but one person per breakout group will need it. So if several of you can copy this link that I just posted in the chat, that should assure that everyone has the link within the breakout group, and or at least one person will be able to get that. So so there's a guided discussion that you all will be going through, and you'll assign different roles within the context of your breakout groups. So the first one is the recorder, just one recorder per group, and the recorder's role is to capture discussions onto the Google form that I just sent the link to you all. Then there's the facilitator. The facilitator's job is to tend the process, to follow the guidance that's given. So within the Google form, there are instructions that will help frame the conversation and ultimately give you the results that you're looking for, that we're looking for, and hopefully that benefit you as well. But we'd like to get you all, you know, sort of on a good, productive conversation track. So the facilitator's job is also to help assure that all the voices are heard. Some of us are more inclined to speak up than others, and we really want to make sure that everyone in the group is contributing their knowledge, because a big part of the focus groups is about how we gather the collective intelligence. So far, you've been hearing a lot from experts and gaining a broader perspective of the industry, but now we want to hear from everyone who's participating, because you all have something to contribute. So the facilitator's job is to help assure that all voices are heard. And similarly, the timekeeper is kind of the facilitator's best friend. They are helping to make sure that the group doesn't get lost chasing rabbits or going down, you know, rabbit holes, if you will. And so making sure that you're moving through the conversation and using the time that you have really well. So keeping the group moving along. And then finally, the last role is a spokesperson, and their job is to report back big ideas to the larger group. Now, not every group is going to be able to report back, but several of them will be able to. So it'd be good to know who's going to be the spokesperson for your group should the need arise. So I'm going to go through the flow of the focus group activities. We're going to have 90 minutes approximately in our focus groups. So you'll start with your group by doing a quick round of introductions. This should really take, 5 minutes, not a lot of time, but just, basically your name, your interest, and what sector you're in, and assigning the roles that I mentioned before. Now, again, all of these instructions are on the Google form, and you'll be able to revert back to them. So I just wanted to go over them today or this morning, and then you'll have that additional guidance as well. So activity 1 is about really grounding our inquiry today in specific, direct, lived experiences. So I'm going to challenge you to not work in generalizations, but to either resource the people who are working directly in the industry and in the field through the first round of questions. And if there isn't a producer directly in the group, go ahead and think of producers and farmers and industry folks that you know specifically and respond to those questions as specifically as you can. Your second activity, so after you've gone through a series of prompts to start to gain perspective, then each person within the breakout group is going to identify based on what they heard. So not based on your current research or something that you came in with an interest of, but specifically what you heard from activity 1, develop a small handful of potential research questions based on activity 1. And then the third activity is to shortlist that. So everyone will have a chance to share the research questions that they develop. There will clearly be themes within those research questions, or some that just seem especially potent or brilliant. So try to identify at least 3 research questions. And this is your minimum goal within the breakout sessions. So you have about 90 minutes to, as a group, understand perspective from the lived experiences of folks working in the industry, and then identify potential research questions and shortlist those into your priorities. Now, this is your minimum goal. If you can achieve that in 90 minutes, you can pat yourselves on the back and feel really good about the work you did. And then for those of you in academia who like extra credit, there's an extra credit activity, which is to flesh out a couple of the research questions more fully. And there's some guidance for how to do that, but essentially to try to understand who your potential research partners might be, what resources would be needed, and how you might measure the outcomes of the questions that you've asked. So that's the structure of the focus groups. Again, if you have any questions about this, please feel free to put those into the chat. And then finally, there are 3 ground rules that I would like to suggest for everyone. So first of all, be present. You've chosen to spend your precious time doing this, so give it your full attention. That means if you're at all able to, just shut down anything else on your computer, close your email, don't look at your phone, but really be present to the conversation. And that's especially important in this online environment where it's difficult for us to feel the connectivity that we would in a room. So do your best to be fully present to your conversation today. Second, be open. Really listen well and be open to not just rethinking thoughts that you've already had, but to having new thoughts and understanding new or different perspectives that maybe you haven't heard before. in a large part because that's where breakthroughs often happen, is in this sort of open state of listening and inquiry. So it's really valuable to the group for you to be open. And then finally, be respectful. You know, this should go without saying, but we all have different views or different perspectives. And we want to create an environment where all voices can be heard and appreciated, and that we may differ in our perspective or understanding, but that those are all valuable perspectives of the whole system. And so creating an environment where we can all hear and see and understand one another, and to speak in confidence if needed. So that kind of goes back to being open as well. We want to create an environment where everyone is able to really speak fully what they see and understand, with confidence that will be held in high regard. So that is that's the main thing here. I know that there have been several folks joining along the way, so I might go back really quickly to recap, to go ahead and recap some of the logistics here, and then we'll go into the breakouts. And I'd like to check in with Brian to see how we're doing on that front, and if you feel like we're ready to do that.
I think another recap, and then I'll be ready here in just a few moments.
Okay, sounds good. So let me get screen share going back again. So just a quick recap on Zoom logistics for those of you who have just joined us. We encourage you to turn on your video for the breakout sessions. Assure that your name is displayed as you'd like. You can change your name by clicking the participant list off of the pop-up bar on Zoom, and then you can right-click your name, or when you get into your breakouts, you can also right-click your name, and that will change that display. At this moment, you're only able to chat with us as hosts, and then we'll open up the chat for the whole group at the end. But if you have any technical questions, please reach out to us as hosts. Again, you've been assigned to breakout groups by the survey that you completed and your interest area. There is an online Google form to capture outputs. I will post that one more time. It's really important that at least one person from every breakout group has that link. And then the recorder from the group will use that link. So you'll be able to share that once you get into the groups. But it's really important that at least one person from each breakout group has this. So if everyone can copy this link right now, that will help us make sure we have what we need. And then again, there will be 4 group roles. So the recorder's job is to capture the conversation onto the Google form. The facilitator's job is to tend the process and to help ensure that all voices are heard and that you're following the guidance that's on the Google Forms. The timekeeper's job is helping to assure that you're moving through the agenda and not getting lost in the woods. And then to identify a spokesperson who may or may not end up sharing some of the outputs from your group at the end of the session. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and place you into the breakout groups. Some of you may not end up in a breakout group immediately, particularly if we're not sure either who you are or which group you're interested in being in. So you'll stay on, and we'll be patient and get everyone sorted into a breakout group. So Brian, if you're ready, can we go ahead and at least do the initial breakouts? And then, I did see a question in the breakout, what is the schedule? So we have about 90 minutes in the breakout sessions now. And there are instructions on the Google form that will tell you how long to spend approximately on each activity. And then we'll come back in. So it is 9:30 Central Time. We will come back together at about 11 o'clock Central Time. We'll send you some prompts as needed to help remind you of where you need to be. And then we'll have a report back and wrap up from 11 to 11:30, and then we'll make sure everybody's done by noon.
And so when you get in the breakout groups, the first thing to do is figure out who wants to be the recorder. Then they can pull out the Google form and share their screen with the group.
And I think maybe it would be helpful for me to just show the form really quickly. So this is the form, and it's got your instructions up here with your overall agenda for how long to spend in each activity, as well as the places for you to answer the various questions. So this will help guide your conversation while you're in the breakout. And the recorder will be capturing here. All right, any other questions before we move into the focus groups? All right, Brian, if you want to go ahead and get the first set done. I know there may still be a couple people that we need to sort out, but let's go ahead and open the breakout. First things first, I want to make sure that everyone who was assigned or took the responsibility of being recorder, that you make sure and submit your responses before you move on to other things. So I think that so far I'm seeing about 9 of the 15 or so groups responding. So if you haven't done so yet, or if you need a minute to finish up your notes, go ahead and do that. But please don't forget to submit your responses. Otherwise, all of that lovely, juicy conversation will have been lost, except for those in the group. So speaking of your conversations, we'd love to hear from some of the groups and to hear some key takeaways, any insights or understanding or clarity that you may have gained, however you feel like it's most fitting to report back. Also, everyone is welcome to have their videos on if you're so inclined. It's a nice time to be able to see each other as a larger whole, which is always one of the challenges of this online environment. So feel free to share your video screen. And I don't have a really clean way to do this, but John, maybe you could kick off the report back and share some of the outcomes from your group, and then a few of the other spokespeople can share their learnings with us as well.
Sure, I'll give a brief summary of our group. So it was a genetics and breeding group, and we had folks from industry, USDA, and academic organizations, and we listed lots of different questions, some even sort of beyond genetics and breeding, but then eventually whittled down to a question of how would you best, so the USDA is funded to have a gene bank for hemp. And unlike most of the species in their gene bank, in this case, there's nothing in it. And so you're starting from scratch trying to collect genetic diversity that could be useful, for example, for disease resistance or adaptation to climate. And so it's a challenge, but it also creates an opportunity to think of how you would actually, what's the most optimal way, with the fewest number of moves or the fewest packets of seed to collect diverse variation in the species that can be publicly available. And so we identified some of the issues that would, some of the sort of checkoffs that would need to be met in order for a geography to be identified as a priority for collection, and the type of the composition of a team that would need to be assembled in order to do this best, which spans from population geneticists to experts on international treaties on germplasm, because things have changed since a lot of the USDA collections were made. And then I'll call on, ask Dawn if she can report back from her group.
Sure. Well, we had a very active discussing group, and so we probably our biggest struggle trying to prioritize and put everything into 3 buckets. But we kind of came up with, come from the supply side, looking at production costs, competitiveness, and best practices, and specifically because there is more than one potential market that producers could be aiming at, needing to do that perhaps in a more nuanced way. The second is looking at priorities for infrastructure, including new models of public-private partnerships and, again, competitiveness in that supply chain sector. And then finally, on the more demand side, what are the most lucrative end markets and what kind of education and is needed for consumers, given this is an emerging market that was prohibited in the past. And there'll be some lack of clarity because of we're kind of taking it from a more unregulated space to regulated space. If anyone in my group wants to clarify any of those things, feel free.
All right.
Also, John, sorry to jump in. If anyone else in the group has clarifying questions or sort of follow-on questions to what you hear from the breakouts, feel free to ask questions at this time too. This is more of an open conversation, open dialogue. We can use the chat function as well. So,
and I forgot I was supposed to hot potato and maybe move it to the group that talked about education and extension and outreach.
Yes.
So that group didn't gel. We didn't have quite enough participants in that group. So those who had signed up for that got distributed to the wins. So let's pick another one.
All right.
I can go if that's fine. So hi, I'm Craig Carlson. I was in the plant breeding and genetics group. We had a very diverse discussion, as you can imagine, being breeders. But really, we talked about seedling establishment, issues with seedling establishment. And one of the main questions from that section is, how do we as breeders mitigate risk for growers as far as seedling establishment is concerned? Also, there's, questions of seed storage and germination. How does germination decay over time with one particular seed lot, et cetera? We also were interested in issues with dormancy, seedling dormancy, planting density, right? A lot of this really basic, like agronomic information that's available for every other crop really isn't standardized in hemp. And so a lot of our discussion was centered around standardizing not only like agronomic aspects of hemp production or hemp growing, but also phenotyping as far as research is concerned, standardizing more phenotypes, and is it feasible to do that across institutions studying hemp, and how well would that be received? But like John McKay and his group, we had his student, and we talked about the USDA germplasm, plans for the germplasm repository, and how we can identify diverse gene pools or coral collections that really maximize the diversity of hemp. And so it was really broad, but a lot of that germplasm would be very useful in understanding some of the genes, right? Using those in multifamily genetic mapping experiments or genome-wide association studies to identify different loci or genes that contribute to variation in pest and disease resistance, as well as other yield traits. So it was a very good discussion.
I'm going to follow up on that because our group was in the agronomic group production, and one of the leading things that we came up with was seedling vigor and establishment as well. So I find that interesting that you guys, as the breeder group, also identified that as an issue. And we kind of thought the same thing. It's an agronomic and plant breeding issue, really, that we need to tackle. And one of the things that we talked about is identifying what the issues are causing poor seedling vigor and establishment. We don't know exactly what the problems are. Is it soil moisture, soil temperature, pest predation such as disease or insects? Those are the things agronomically we need to dig into so that to help you guys as breeders identify where can we strengthen the plant and the seedlings to help with that. So I wanted to follow up with that. I appreciate that. The other, we had a couple others that were important that we identified, which was disease identification and management. Right now we've heard this, especially yesterday, that hemp is full of diseases, and I think proper identification and therefore also management of those diseases, whether it be proper crop rotations or the use of fungicides, if we one day have that available, we need to identify those particular diseases that are most susceptible for each of the different types of crops, grain, fiber, and CBD, because we are seeing different diseases on the crops as well. We talked about identifying ideal planting and harvest dates across each region. That seems to be what works in one university or research study may not be the same for others. And we feel that through variety trials, we can do this, and we can do this for a lot of these different issues we came up with through variety trials. But planting dates and harvest dates are one that we need to standardize by region, by state, the way we talked about it. And then lastly, increasing the efficiency of production, harvest, and post-harvest of each of the 3 different types of this crop. We don't have the quote-unquote guidebooks of planting, harvest, and post-harvest for grain, fiber, or CBD, and establishing those best management practices regionally, but as a collective whole as well, is going to be important agronomically.
Thanks.
This is CJ. I was part of the breeding group. I guess there was two sort of breeding groups, but might be a good follow-up to what the last two have went, if I go ahead.
That's great. Thank you, CJ.
Great. So we had a lot of discussion about germplasm. So there's been a bit said, just the last two people, and really sort of a lack of germplasm and really stable germplasm. So farmers, their biggest concern right now when planting something is that their crops are not consistent. And nearly every seed provider does have this problem. And it's also just hard to get germplasm. Nearly everything is under some type of contract or taken up. And so availability of being able to do the research we need to do, it is sort of missing. It'd be great if we had like a common collection or a certain variety. John has suggested this before, taking a variety and making, for instance, a mutagenesis population that would be available to the community, something similar to what was done by Arabidopsis. We talked a lot about the need for inbreeding of strains so that we can get appropriate populations to do QTL mapping for gene discovery and GWAS. So there seems to be a lot of information missing on gene discovery, and it's really because phenotype. Genotypically, cannabis is in a really good state, actually. There's a lot of data available, but phenotype-wise, we're sort of missing the other pair of that equation to get to the genes. We talked about agronomic traits of importance and, of course, pest resistance and how we can possibly breed better for that, or ways to try to get around the problems now that there's nothing authorized for cannabis. So cover crops are trying to have a dense canopy. And then multi-crop systems. So there is, many people have mentioned this, that, you know, perhaps having a CBD and grain variety. So something that produces two different products that then can go to market. And this has been big in Europe, even though they were really looking at fiber and grain. You know, fiber may not go so well with CBD, because with fiber, you don't really want there to be much of a flower. And finally, we discussed a lot about pangenomics, so trying to catalog the variation in cannabis, get an idea of different alleles. For instance, different alleles of CBDAS may help us get to plants that are more compliant for THCA concentrations. And also that there's a really sort of a big problem in funding. And even though I'm sort of an academic at heart, I'm on the business side. A number of people in our group are on the business side. And we really are having trouble getting funds to do any type of basic research. And, you know, I, along with the other companies, usually have some collaboration with universities. It's almost necessary to be able to grow things and do trial studies. So it would be great if there was some type of funding system that was also helping companies participate with academics, so some more type of partnership. I'm not really sure how to get that type of thing rolling, but it would really help, because some of the companies have to keep their stuff private because they need to make money from it. If we were able to, you know, alleviate some of that, perhaps they could make a greater contribution for the public good. So thank you.
All right. How about the disease and insect group, since every other group seems to be talking about diseases? What did you guys get up to?
Okay, so the disease and entomology groups combined. I guess we're more of pest management and plant health related. So there were 8 of us on the group. Through our discussions, we basically condensed down to number 1, what pests are economically important, both at a regional level and at a national level. So where there's similarities and where is it regionally specific. So needing that research and that information. Secondly, how do we most efficiently and effectively engage with industry and growers, and then prioritize those issues? So how do we communicate, not just from a research perspective, but how do we engage in, once we do have that data, how do we reach, and we talked a little bit about, you know, keyboard diagnosticians and people who are not confirming what's out there, and a lot of misinformation being out there. especially as a result of social media. So how do we get the right information and from the people who have data? And then thirdly, how can we identify the most effective tools for pest management? And that's everything from pesticides to other disease or pest management realms. And then how do we bring that to the forefront? How do we get those to the growers? Our last challenge was to expand upon, to flesh out one of those questions. And that was our first question. What pathogens and pests are the most important, whether regionally or nationally? And we determined that we would start with what's already known. So our National Plant Diagnostic Lab Network and the National Plant Disease Diagnostic Network. What's in those databases? How can we pull that information together? Because that has been vetted. And then we can manipulate that data by region, by geographic area, and from a national level. And then also to follow up with a series of surveys of our hemp workers, of our industry scientists, university scientists from both the insect and disease standpoints, and how can we start some type of annual survey of those partners and be able to look at changes over time. I'm going to make sure I didn't forget anything here. Does anybody else want to chime in here? And then, of course, we identified other partners that we could bring into this project so that we can make sure we have representatives from across the U.S. It seems like most of us are concentrated on the East Coast, Northeast, and the Southeast. We have a few West Coast partners, but we don't have a good distribution of collaborators. So who can we identify to work with us? So if anybody else in our group has anything else, but in a nutshell, that's where we are.
I would only add that, you know, this is like the first step, and then a lot of things follow after that, after this, you know, information becomes solidified. You know, things like efficacy data for management solutions, things like economic thresholds that Jeff brought up, and you know, everything else that comes into the ecology of pest management and how market classes and production systems play into how effective our management is.
And there was a comment about economic thresholds, and yes, Jeff, we at UK are doing that this year. We've got some preliminary work going on, but yeah. So the economics of all of those components, and the ability to fund all of those components in our priority questions, they're kind of underlying. So these three questions are really loaded. But if we can get a start, I think that will unfold into a lot of spin-off projects and even data that can be collected in those projects that I think could really be expanded.
Right. Josie, I want to check in on how we're doing here.
I think we've got a little bit more time. Technically, we have still about 25 minutes left, and it seems like this is a pretty valuable conversation for the group to be sort of hearing everything. So let's do, another 10 minutes if there's more for the group to talk about and share.
So I'll go for our group to the best of my memory. We talked about hemp as the potential as a complementary crop and as a potential challenger crop to existing crops that are out there. And we recognize that we have potentially, single outputs or multiple outputs in these systems. A number of the challenges that were identified by the breeder groups in terms of establishment and that sort of thing were discussed yeah, I'll just say from my own perspective of how I've been humbled this year with things that didn't work that should have, et cetera. So bring it on, breeders. We're looking forward to it. But I guess one of the issues that arises as you start thinking about hemp as a single or multi-purpose crop, it's not just in the agronomic production, but it's also in the processing and product stream. So that we need to think about how this is grown, utilized from a systematic fashion. And one of the questions that we were trying to get our hands around is how is hemp best managed, grown both from an environmental and economic standpoints, within the context of existing cropping systems. Short season, long season, single output, multiple outputs, is it going to be competitive with other commodity crops in those different types of systems? If I can grow a lot more carbohydrates with corn than I can with hemp, okay, if hemp's a little bit more nutritionally beneficial, maybe I get some of those nutrients elsewhere, and it doesn't really stack up. So how do we put these systems together or grow hemp in a manner that means that it's a economically valuable tool for farmers? That's probably a kind of a gross characterization of what we talked about in our group. But a lot of these things come back to soil health management, as well, crop management and soil health management, and kind of in the combination. How does one affect the other, and they're kind of the interrelationships there. And help me out, group. Abdel, Nicole, somebody want to comment?
No, John, I think you covered that pretty well. Anything? I think no. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I'll be quiet then.
John, this is Tyler. One thing I would kind of add to that from an economic standpoint, though, is how do each of these systems impact the final product that's produced, and how does that final product flow into the supply chains? I think we often think about how do we produce it at the farm level, but we forget downstream it's got to fit into those. So
yeah, sorry I didn't mean to interrupt you or cut you off so much, but to say that was really kind of what we were thinking about is, it's fine if you grow a huge amount of hemp grain, but if you've got no way to process it, no market to deliver it to, no end user for it, that's of no value.
Yeah, correct. But I'm thinking about going even further at the end of the supply chain and working backwards.
Yep.
So, yeah, we got to keep.
Well, and then that brings up another question, Tyler. Is at the end of the supply chain, is that only a bast fiber? Is that a bast and a hurd? And do I take that fiber crop further because the value of bast is not so great and I can get a little bit more money or get some money for the herd? Or am I better to harvest it early as a textile, and I don't want any herd in that system? So there are lots of questions about what the endpoints are. Am I going grain and capturing chaff or whatever for a cannabinoid market? So the endpoints are undefined. So I guess one of the first things we asked for at our group was a crystal ball.
Yeah, and I would say the economic group, we shook that crystal ball and nothing came out yet. So we're working on that. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head as trying to figure out what the demand for each of these products is at the end. And I think that's still an undefined product at this point in time. We're starting to see some things become a little bit clearer, but yeah, what that end product is then exactly going to shape what those crops look like at the farm level.
I just want to make a comment about that, actually, that the same kind of thing is happening with the grain. We know fiber, the bast or the herd, but with grain, we have the oil, we have the hemp hearts, we have some companies that are making hemp milk now. So I know it was discussed earlier. I don't know if it was yesterday or earlier in the conference, but we've we've almost developed this market in a way backwards of having so much emphasis on the farming aspect of it that we're growing this crop without knowing what we're trying to grow it for. And I think that's what's left us with so much of a crop out in the bins or out in the field that farmers can't get rid of, because either A, they haven't grown it correctly to spec, or B, they never had a market to begin with and they just wanted to grow it. So, I think it emphasizes the need to, I don't know about pump the brakes a little bit here, but we need to have processors and buyers at the end of the day before farmers really start growing this crop on a tremendous number of acres.
Right. I would agree with you, Brian. And like Tyler was saying, we have to kind of reverse engineer the whole process. So how the new marketplace is going to be set up is considering all of those variations, all of those fluctuations in the market. And I think starting from the backside would be helpful for the whole industry. No farmer should be left with a crop in their possession. No processor should be left with a crop or any product in their possession, right? So how can we mitigate those risks is finding the market. So product development is going to be a big factor for the economic development of hemp as a crop. So finding those market, working with the universities, finding industrial partners who are dedicated for the sustainable consumer product development, that's going to be the target. And I think, in my opinion, in my company's opinion, I think this is where we need to focus on getting those corporations, getting those industry partners lined up, getting them excited and educated about the benefits of hemp, and then incorporating hemp into their existing infrastructure. And then we can cycle back, because I mean, more products we develop, more products goes into the market, automatically more farms are going to start popping up, more processors are going to start popping up. But if we do that before creating the market, then it might not be such a good thing for the market as a whole. So yeah.
All right, thank you. We didn't hear from the regulatory issues group or the seed characteristics group. And then Brian Mitchell, maybe you can tell me if there's other things we're missing, but if anyone from either of those two groups, if the spokesperson has a short summary.
Yeah, regulatory's got a short summary I'll jump in on. We had a pretty brisk discussion about a wide ranging topics, but we limited those questions down to our short list included the need to understand THC production, proper sampling, timing of that sampling, and decarboxylation, namely the conversion of Delta-9 THC to, or the THCA to the neutral form. So that was the first one. The second question that came out of our group was, what research is needed to get hemp grain approved as animal feed, thinking that is probably one of the best uses for this to, again, to build a supply chain and find markets for these. And then another question was, what are the ways that regulations could lower farmers' risks? Again, to not leave them with crops they can't use or find markets for. And then how can we get the hemp industry to collaborate and unify towards a common goal? And I think that speaks volumes to the comments with there's so many different end uses for these products that becomes a challenge, you know, in the way that's being done now. Does anybody else from our group have anything to add to that?
So can I ask kind of a follow-up, or maybe it's more of a comment, thinking about the markets, and you know, I've heard this argument that we need to open up the animal feeds opportunities. I think the question I have is in a market context, you know, I've talked to people who could feed hemp seed or other stuff, and you know, if they're a commodity producer, chickens, eggs, whatever, it's just one more thing that they could put in a bin, and their bins are full. So how do you justify it, or how do you get the value add out of it? You know, if Eggland's Best can say that they have hemp seed in their feeds, and so the fatty acid profile is better, that's great. But at the commodity level, the least cost egg, the least cost chicken is what they're after. And if hemp is a higher price commodity, there's no value in that.
I think some of the conversation, it looks like Wendy was going to jump into. I think some of the conversation was, do we have enough research to say it is a more valuable crop?
And
Go ahead, Wendy.
yeah, so hey, this is Wendy. I'm on the Hemp Feed Coalition, which Jeff is referring to in the chat. It wouldn't be commodity right away. You're right, it can't be. It has to be niche. It has to be value add. And you know, if you look at its new nutrition profile, it is unique, and it has some unique aspects that can be competitive with soy. And you know, its lipid profile is much better than that of soy, and it's got all the 9 amino acids. So there's certainly companies interested. They want to use it, and we've been reached out to by a number of those companies. There are feed ingredient applications that are being prepped for submission to the FDA CVM. They're highly supportive of grain applications. So I think, and even, you know, cattle, which would take a hell of a lot longer, right, to get through because it's consumption. But there are even people working on cattle. So I know there's chicken studies still going on. There is research in chicken studies that it enhances the omega-3, but you're right. Does the cost compete with what they're using now? And I think it has to be looked at as niche first for what those additional nutrients are, like the GLA, and can the market capture that value add?
I'd like to just make one comment on that. You know, a lot of the push seems to be from processors with the excess protein meal, essentially, of why the feed is so desirable. But I guess maybe looking at it from a slightly different perspective on the farmer side and ask, is a lot of the reason that farmers are looking to grow something other than corn and soybeans is because those crops are already at the bottom price. And if we look at hemp as being a feed additive, we now have to compete with corn and soybean prices, particularly soybeans, right? So now we have the dilemma of having too low of a price for hemp going to the feed markets for the farmer level, that we're not going to get farmers to grow it and in a substitute for soybeans, for example.
Which is why dual or tricrops, you know, tricropping from it is essential. It can't just be for one thing initially, at least. It's nascent, right? It needs, you know, we need nutritionists to look at this and formulators, right, to tell us how much to add and what value does it add. So we, you know, as an industry, we want that research to happen. We, you know, will help facilitate that research. It is absolutely, I think, beneficial to animals in a different way than soy. So it's not going to compete with corn, but yeah.
So we are running up against the end of our time that we have available today. Clearly, there's a lot to talk about and consider, and we're really grateful for everyone and your participation in the focus groups because it really gives us an opportunity to hear more directly and sort of harness the collective intelligence and experience that is in the virtual room. So thank you all for your time and your thoughts and your commitment to your work. John, I'm going to turn it over to you to wrap us up and talk about next steps, where you plan to go with all of the information that we've gathered today, and how you see this moving forward.
All right. Thanks, Josie, and thanks everyone for their input. My next step is to take a Zoom meeting break for 2 days. But we will be, did you get all of the results in? Okay, great. So we will be compiling these. As I've mentioned, this conference was funded by a grant from USDA, and we have a final report that we have to create as an obligation to that funding. And we will be, as we showed the overall objectives of the conference earlier, what we did today is one of the large deliverables of the conference. So we'll be summarizing these research questions that the focus groups today have contributed, and those will be made available. You know, I would say I forget exactly when our final report is due, but I would say in September or October, we'll put that together. And then, you know, obviously this is the first federally funded research conference on hemp. It's clear that there's lots of questions in this semi-new crop, and so going forward, you know, we'll some of these research agendas people laid out will require someone to take the lead on writing a grant proposal and pursuing the funding for that, and so that, you know, that's a distributed activity that the whole participants will need to get involved in if we're going to get the funding to answer these questions. All right, so yeah, so I just want to thank everyone for participating, and you know, I don't know if Abdel has any final words, but you know, this would have been better in person, but thanks again, and I think, you know, we did our best with the pandemic, so.
I just say thank you. That's it.
Yeah, the organizers did a great job. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thanks all. I hope everyone is being productive, and sane, and sheltering in place, and we'll see you at some point, and if you've received many emails, I know, about this conference, and they contain the link to our CSU hemp website, and that's where we will post the final reports from this project.
So, John, I think there is some question about, you know, being able to see